The cathedral stands on the smaller of the two islands in the Seine that form the original heart of Paris. The Isle de la site has been continuously occupied for at least 23 centuries. Before there was a France, there was a Celtic settlement here called Lutetia. The Romans took it, paved it, raised a temple to Jupiter on the spot where the cathedral now stands. The Franks took it from the Romans. The Merovingians built a basilica on the temple's foundations. The Carolingians remodeled the basilica. By the year 1160, the church on the island had become too small. Maurice de Sully, the Bishop of Paris, was a peasant boy who had risen, through theological brilliance and political skill, to the highest ecclesiastical seat in northern France. He wanted to build something the city had never seen. He chose the new architecture of the time, what we now call Gothic. The technique had been invented less than 30 years earlier at the Abbey of Saint-Denis, just north of Paris, where the royal monks had discovered how to lighten the walls of a church by transferring its weight to external piers, flying buttresses, and pointing every arch to convert downward thrust into vertical compression. Sully had seen Saint-Denis. He had seen what was possible. He summoned an unnamed master mason, the records call him only the architect of Notre Dame, and gave him an island and a budget. Construction began in 1163. The foundation stone was laid by Pope Alexander III, on a visit to Paris that summer. The building would not be finished for another 180 years. The medieval cathedrals were not built in lifetimes. They were built in dynasties. The man who began the choir died long before the choir was vaulted. The crews who carved the rose windows were grandsons of the crews who had set the foundations. Sons inherited their father's tools. Master masons trained their successors, knowing the building they were drawing would not be roofed until their own great-grandchildren were old. The construction of Notre Dame took 8 generations. It moved in stages. The choir, with its altar and its surrounding ambulatory, was finished first, by 1182, 20 years in. The nave, the long central hall, followed slowly. The west front, the great facade with its 3 deep portals and its row of biblical kings, took until 1240. The 2 western towers were completed around 1260. The flying buttresses, the slim stone supports that made the high vaulted ceiling possible, were added throughout the 13th century as the engineering of the project evolved in the mason's hands. By 1345, when the last builders set down their tools, Paris had a cathedral that could hold 9,000 worshippers, that rose 96 meters into the sky, and that had a single longer continuous nave than almost any building then standing in Europe. It also had something almost none of its earlier churches had as light. The Gothic system, flying buttresses outside, pointed vaults inside, meant that the walls themselves no longer had to carry the weight of the roof. The walls could thin. They could open. They could become glass. The rose windows of Notre Dame, each 10 meters in diameter, each composed of thousands of pieces of stained glass set in stone tracery, filled the cathedral's interior with colored light that medieval visitors described, again and again, as the closest experience they had ever had of heaven. The cathedral was complete. Now it had to survive. It almost did not survive the 16th century. The wars of religion tore France apart between 1562 and 1598. Catholic and Protestant armies fought in the streets of Paris. Notre Dame was a Catholic symbol, and Protestant troops, when they had the chance, smashed the statues, defaced the carved figures on the portals, broke the windows. The cathedral became a target rather than a sanctuary. By the end of the wars, much of its sculpture had been mutilated. It almost did not survive the French Revolution, 2 centuries later. In 1793, the revolutionary government declared the cathedral a temple of reason. Religious imagery was banned. The kings of Judah on the west front, 28 stone figures looking down on the parvis, were mistaken for kings of France and deliberately decapitated by the crowd. The heads were sold for stone or buried. They were rediscovered, 200 years later, in a basement in the 8th arrondissement. They are now on display at the Cluny Museum. Inside the cathedral, the high altar was destroyed. The lead from the roof was melted for revolutionary bullets. The bells were taken down and recast as cannon, except for the great bell of the South Tower, called Emmanuel, weighing 13 tons, cast in 1681. Emmanuel was too large and too perfectly tuned to be wasted on weapons. It alone survived. By 1800, Notre Dame was being used as a warehouse. Wagons rolled across the choir floor. The flagstones were greasy with food storage. The masonry was crumbling. Napoleon was crowned emperor inside it in 1804 by Pope Pius VII, but the ceremony was held in a building so ruined that elaborate temporary decorations had to be hung to hide the damage. 20 years later, the cathedral was being seriously discussed as a candidate for demolition. What saved it was a novel. Victor Hugo published Notre Dame de Paris in 1831. The story of the hunchbacked bell-ringer Quasimodo, the dancer Esmeralda, and the obsessive archdeacon Frollo was set in the medieval cathedral and made a hero of the building itself. Hugo wrote, in the opening chapter, a passionate description of the cathedral as a wounded masterpiece, a vast symphony in stone that had been slowly destroyed by neglect, mutilation, and the indifference of the modern age. The book was a sensation. Within a decade, public opinion had shifted. The French state launched a national restoration in 1844, led by the architects Eugene Viollet-le-Duc and Jean-Baptiste Lassus. They recarved the smashed statues. They restored the Gallery of Kings. They replaced the missing rose windows. They re-roofed the cathedral in lead. And they added, in 1860, a new central spire, a slender wooden flesh covered in lead sheets, taller than the medieval original, rising 90 meters above the crossing. It was Viollet-le-Duc's spire, with the gilded copper statues of the 12 apostles clustered at its base, that became the most photographed feature of Paris's skyline for the next 160 years. It was Viollet-le-Duc's spire that, on the night of April 15, 2019, would fall. But before that night, there would be one more close call. In August 1944, German forces occupying Paris were preparing to withdraw. The military governor, General Dietrich von Choltitz, had been ordered by Adolf Hitler to destroy the city before retreating. The order specifically named the great monuments, the Louvre, the Opera, the Eiffel Tower, and Notre Dame. Charges of explosive were placed beneath the cathedral. German engineers wired the towers. The plan was that Paris would burn in the same way Warsaw had burned a month earlier. Choltitz refused. He had been in command of the siege of Sevastopol 2 years earlier. He had seen what total destruction looked like. He told his staff, privately, that he would not be the man who destroyed Paris. When Free French troops entered the city on August 25, the charges were still in place beneath the towers, but no one had detonated them. The cathedral was rung that night with every bell intact. Choltitz surrendered. The lead spire stood untouched. For the next 75 years, Notre Dame would continue to do what it had always done, stand on its island, gather its visitors, mark the hours. When the fire began on the evening of April 15, 2019, the cathedral was already mid-restoration. Scaffolding wrapped the spire. Workers had left for the day. The first alarm went off at 6:20 in the evening. A misread message sent guards to the wrong section of the building. By the time the fire was located, in the attic over the choir, it had spread across an oak forest of medieval beams so dense and dry it was sometimes called la forêt, the forest. The spire came down at 7:53. 500 firefighters worked through the night. The temperature inside the building reached, at peak, 800 degrees Celsius. The lead of the roof melted and ran down through the cracks of the vaulting. The great rose windows, by some miracle of medieval engineering, held, their stone tracery surviving a heat that should have shattered any glass. By dawn the next morning, the towers were standing. The walls were standing. The 3 rose windows were standing. The medieval altar, the wooden Christ on its cross above it, the gold cross behind it, all standing, somehow, in a chamber where the ceiling had collapsed and the floor was ankle-deep in molten lead. The cathedral had taken a great wound. But it was, again, alive. The reconstruction took 5 years. President Emmanuel Macron pledged that it would. 3,000 workers, masons, carpenters, glaziers, organ tuners, stone carvers, metallurgists, were drawn from every region of France. A new forest of oak was felled for the roof, 2,000 trees, harvested from the same kinds of long-standing French oak woods that had supplied the medieval cathedral. Lead from the original roof, recovered and recast, was used again. The flesh of Viollet-le-Duc was rebuilt to its 1860 design, by hand, by carpenters using the same medieval techniques that had set the original roof in place. The cathedral reopened in December 2024. The bells rang again. The first Mass was celebrated for the first time in 5.5 years. Outside in the Parvis, people stood quietly. They had stood quietly there before. They would stand quietly there again. The kings on the west front are not the original kings. The spire is not the original spire. The roof is not the original roof. And yet the cathedral is the cathedral. It has been so since 1163, through fire and revolution and war and neglect, not because the stones are eternal, but because each generation, when its turn came, decided to put the stones back where they belonged. That, in the end, may be the real meaning of Notre Dame. If this story made the river feel a little quieter, there are more like it waiting, long buildings, slow centuries, the patient work of putting things back, told gently, every week, on Embedded Histories. Drift into history. Hit subscribe and we'll meet again at the next great door.